that was me.
Not like Joe. Thank you. Now, ladies and gentlemen, on side government here today, what we've proposed is to change what we believe is appropriate. And what side oppositions continue to fail to understand is that every single time, the loud are going to outscream the quiet. The opinions that we most often hear about, the things that are most often discussed, are what the loudest people want to talk about. And what we believe on side governments does not represent an accurate showing of what people do and do not believe. Now, as the second speaker, I'm going to do a number of things for you. The first thing I'm going to take a look at is the things that have been said in this debate so far by Joe McGrady. Then I'm going to go in and rebuild a little bit of what Colt said and expand on this idea about the loud outscreaming everyone else. So let's deal with Cal's POI first. The first thing brought to this round was this idea about age consent. And we don't think, Cole handled that pretty adequately. He said, you know what, we're not advocating for kids watching lots of porn. We don't think that's appropriate. But at the same time, we also feel like exposure to that isn't necessarily the worst thing in the world. I mean, have you guys ever been to Montreal, McGill team? Yeah. We'd say if you walk down St. Catharines, you're going to see certain explicit content. What we believe is this does encourage open and honest discourse amongst people. We think that's actually a pretty good thing, as Cole pointed out. So really, we'd say that in either way, even without this, they're still going to be exposed to that in certain areas. We'd rather have it be an open, honest discussion than one that takes place with them just searching things on the internet. So going on, it talks about how community representation, how the internet doesn't necessarily represent, what people, an honest collection of the people. And Joe told us that his mom's not using the internet, his brother's not using the internet, his dog is not using the internet. He told us that he doesn't know people that use the internet. We're confused because we think that everyone is pretty much on the web at this point. No thanks, Cal. So we'd say that at this point, just about everyone is starting to use the internet. As we go forward, I mean, it's pretty understandable that mostly everyone does use it. I use it, my family use it. We can go back and forth about personal examples of who does and does not use the internet. But we'd say it's a fairly common metric and a good way of judging what a majority of people believe. And so they tried to come back and tell us that really, there's nothing we can really useful that we can glean from internet searches. What we'd say is that no, it shows broad trends and swaths of behavior through things like repeated viewings. You begin to understand what people are watching repeatedly, what they believe to be appropriate and okay. And furthermore, we believe that by even viewing this in some sense, there's an implicit belief that actually seeing it is on some level appropriate. We believe that in doing so, that needs to be brought out into the public discourse to be discussed. So Joe brought up this counter idea about an open forum. In 2 seconds ago. And he talks about how basically instead of doing this and looking at people's search histories to kind of gauge that, instead we should have an open forum. I'm going to explain to you why that doesn't work with stigmatized subjects after I take Cal.
How many people who watched Two Girls, One Cup wanted to watch it again?
I don't know. How many people, I mean, we wouldn't say that's a very popular thing we'd want to be out there because not very many people have repeated viewings of Two Girls, One Cup, right? We'd say that's actually a way that you can judge what is and is not appropriate behavior. I mean, if you're watching it 2 or 3 times a day, that's cool, man, but I don't think anyone else is. So anyway, back to Joe's idea about the open forum. He told us that, instead we should just encourage people to have open, honest discussion. We think, yeah, open, honest discussion is important. It's something that we should do. But unfortunately, most people aren't willing to go out and talk about their foot fetish very publicly, right? What we'd say is that actually what we need to do is coax them out by showing that other people are okay and believe certain norms of behavior are acceptable. We'd say that's exactly what you do by allowing this, right? It's not about watching porn in the park or having it vividly displayed on bus stops. It's about what is and is not appropriate behavior that people can believe and discuss about, right? We think that's actually a misrepresentation on their side. So he talks about how acceptable behavior isn't judged, really. And we'd say that if lots of people are looking at something, chances are it's for a reason. If they're looking at it repeatedly, it's probably not just for research reasons or just to see if there is in fact a neo-Nazi board out there. Chances are they're going back to it because they believe in it, support it, no thank you, and want to view it multiple times and have some sort of connection to it. We think for that reason, you can pretty accurately judge what they do and do not believe to be appropriate behavior. Now, so finally he talks about how we sort of form collective norms by having open, honest discussion. We'd say we do believe that. We think that's acceptable. But what we have to understand is a lot of people aren't willing to have this open and honest discussion about certain things because they assume that nobody else is with them, right? But by bringing this out to the more public forum and showing people that demonstrably that these views are acceptable and that other people agree with them, we think you encourage a more open, honest discussion between them. So let's take a look at what was said by Cole in the debate so far. Now, we didn't really hear much of a response on their side. I mean, they talked about, we demonstrated to you quite clearly about how, well, I totally lost my train of thought. Hi. We're talking about how it's actually a good, a way to gauge metric, right? It's a good way to measure. We think that despite what they said about the internet not being something used popularly by everyone, we think it is, and does show broad swaths of behavior. He told us that in fact, Cole stood up and talked about how we need to remove the stigma on certain subjects. So we can simply step back and say, look, some subjects are acceptable. And to that, he said, there's a stigma for things for a reason. People don't watch stuff because they think it's bad. We think actually no. A lot of the time people don't discuss things is because they're afraid to view and voice those opinions publicly. We'd say that obscenity isn't necessarily decided by you guys, it's decided by the public judgment. We feel people are simply nervous to discuss these issues, and we think that's something we can actually overcome. So let's take a look most importantly about this idea about how the louds sort of outscream everyone else. And we'd say that you don't actually get a clear indication through through the status quo of what people do and do not believe to be appropriate because of the different methods of conduct. We'd say that oftentimes the viewpoints that we're most often exposed to are the very loud, frequently conservative ones, right? Like we all see certain ads for certain behaviors, right? And what we'd say is that really these repeated viewings and the sort of the loud, outspoken behavior on the part of these people is oftentimes the viewpoints that we're most often exposed to, as opposed to the real, genuine opinions and beliefs that people have when they express themselves quietly in their private life. We'd say that that's actually when people are most honest and most often viewing what they believe to be acceptable. So really what we'd say is that this is actually an effective way to kind of counterbalance what the current issue we have now, which is seeing a lot of viewpoints, but really only the loudest ones get heard most often. So what have we showed you in this debate so far today? Well, Cole stood up and talked about how essentially we need to remove the stigma, how the internet is a useful tool for gauging public opinion on things. He talked to you about how we can have an open, honest discussion about things, how societal values are currently not necessarily dictated by the people themselves, but by simply those who can scream the loudest and shout everyone down. What we've demonstrated to you quite clearly is we have a model that allows and takes into account people's repeated viewings of things, their open and honest behavior as exhibited through the internet. And for those reasons, we beg to oppose. Thank you very much.